So in the next couple of slides, we're trying to assess how large the volatility of exchange rates is compared to other important financial instruments such as the stock market. So we start in slide 15 by looking at the exchange rate between the US dollar and the British pound, which doesn't really exhibit a clear downward or upward trend in this series. We can see that from 1974 to 1984, there's probably a downward trend, followed by a constant behavior over time of the British pound. In slide 16, we're just taking the percent changes of this exchange rate, and we can get a sense of the level of volatility just by looking at this diagram. We see that there are several episodes of variations that are above and below the plus and minus 10% oscillation bands. In particular, there are at least 3 episodes of variation that is larger than minus 10% and at least 2 episodes in which variation is greater than plus 10%. In slide 17, we're plotting percent changes for the Standard & Poor's 500, which is summarizing the stock market by including the 500 stocks with larger capitalization listed in the United States, and we see that there are probably even more extreme episodes. So we can count at least 4 episodes of negative changes larger than 10% and several more episodes of changes, positive changes larger than 10%. At slide 18, we have a little bit of an overview of several exchange rates and of their volatility, which is represented in the second column after standard deviation. And we see that the level of variation of the British pound is slightly lower than the level of variation of the Standard & Poor's 500, but the level of variation, for example, of the Japanese yen is almost in line with the level of variation of the Standard & Poor's 500. On the other hand, the level of variation or volatility of the Canadian dollar is less than half actually of the Standard & Poor's 500. One final thing to notice is that the mean reflects the general trend followed by our time series. So we see that, for example, the Japanese yen has had positive mean in the quarterly percent changes in the exchange rate, meaning that on average the changes have been positive, which reflects that uptrend that we have seen in previous slides. While for the Canadian dollar and the British pound, the general trend is almost flat. In the Canadian dollar, we had seen that it was decreasing for a certain period of time and then increasing. For the British pound, it was not really clear if the series was following any trend, and this is reflected indeed in the mean quarterly percent change. We see also that the Standard & Poor's 500 has had a general trend, increasing trend, which is quite strong, about 2% quarterly percent change on average. We see also that the volatility is again comparable or even higher than the volatility of exchange rates, and we can see it also by looking at the maximum and minimum level of percent changes which are recorded in the last 2 columns. We see that the maximum level of variation for the Standard & Poor's 500 is greater than any other maximum level of variation or quarterly percent change for any of the exchange rates that we have, and the same is also true for the worst percent change over the considered time period, in which we have a 26% negative change for the Standard & Poor's 500, and the largest negative change would be for the British pound of negative 19%.